I'm so sorry that the battery on the camera just died just like that in the middle of a sentence. I think we were talking about intentional torts, the intentional tort of battery, and within the the intentional tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress. And within that particular intentional tort, I was saying that the courts expect a certain level of toughness out of everybody. And that is, if I simply say to you, oh, you're such a jerk, that's not an intentional infliction of emotional distress. It may have distressed you for a moment, but it's not severe, and there's a severity that has to come with it for the courts to recognize this relatively new tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress. So this is a summary of the different types of intentional torts, and I think that if you put them all together, you've got one of the three flavors of torts. Okay, so I almost made it to where the breaking point was going to be, so we're going to jump into where I thought we were going to start the second tape, and that is, what can we expect in the way of damages if you sue somebody? Let's start first with who the players are. By the way, one of the great things about doing these at home is, A, the batteries can run out. I've taught for a zillion years, and in every lecture I've ever given, I've never had my batteries quit. I've never had a cat walk into the middle of a classroom and start meowing. Probably the phone will ring next, and then I don't know what, the smoke detector at home will go off or something. So it's one of the joys of lecturing from home. I would rather be in class, but that's okay. So if you sue somebody, you are the plaintiff. The plaintiff is the person who files the suit. It's the person that initiates the action in court, that gets the ball rolling. It's the person who wants something. They are the plaintiff. They are demanding something from, they're saying to the legal system, I've been hurt, I've been injured, there's relief that I want in some way. That's the plaintiff. The party who is accused of having done something wrong is the defendant. Okay, so we have the plaintiff and the defendant. Okay, with the plaintiff files the lawsuit, whether it's for the intentional tort of battery or the intentional tort of assault or whichever the torts that we're talking about are. They file that case, and what they're asking the court to do is to give them money. Okay, because unfortunately there is no way to unbatter somebody. There is no way to unassault somebody. There is no way to, undo the emotional harm that was done to somebody by the intentional infliction of emotional distress. So all that we have in the legal system that we can do for these people is to give them money. So they go to court and they ask for money. That money can come in a couple of different ways. So as you are in court and you're asking for money, you ask for money in a couple of different categories. One are called economic damages. Okay, economic damages, and economic damages are damages for things like lost wages. Economic damages could include things like medical bills related to the injury that you had from the battery. They could include things like future medical bills that you expect, because there's going to be more surgery that's required before you can, be fully put back together. So past medical bills related to the thing alleged, future medical bills related to the thing alleged, lost wages related to the thing, all those are in the nature of economic damages. So when we seek damages, we want to find a way to make people whole. And making somebody whole can come from giving them not just economic damages, but also damages for non-economic things. And I've got a slide. Let's see here. So I have to do this. And by the way, this slide, we have to jump past examples in healthcare, because we're going to come back to that one. And we're now on the slide called non-economic damages. Okay, so if you're with me on the slideshow, we're at non-economic damages. And these can be things like pain and suffering. If I stab you with a knife, it was probably painful, and it seems fair that you should be compensated for the pain that I caused you. If I hit you over the head with a chair, you might have a broken nose and your nose is all crooked, and that would be disfigurement, or you could have scars from it, and that would seem something fair to compensate you for. You might have loss of consortium or hedonistic damages. Now, we're going to come back to that one in a minute because they're a little complicated. You could have loss of reputation. Suppose under slander or libel, as an example, that I said that you had a terrible sexually transmitted disease and that people should stay away from you, and as a result you had a loss of reputation. People thought less of you, or that maybe nobody wanted to hire you because I told everybody that you were a drunk. So that loss of reputation is something that you should be compensated for. And finally, we have what are called punitive damages. So before we jump to punitive, I said we'd go back to loss consortium and hedonistic damages. Hedonistic damages are those damages to make up for the fact that there are things that you can't do that you used to be able to do. So as an example, suppose that I hit you over the head with a chair, or better yet, I hit you over the head with a chair, and then while you're on the ground, I beat you with the chair. And this is what I do to students that fall asleep in class. So when I do that, as a result, you have a permanent injury to your shoulder. And one of the things that you loved in life before this terrible thing I did to you happened is you loved going fly fishing. And you can no longer, fly fish. If you can't fly fish anymore, you've lost one of the joys of life. This is the hedonistic part of life. Things that we do that bring us pleasure and joy are hedonistic things. And there's nothing horrible about hedonistic things. They're things we like in life. Maybe it's, I can't sit and watch the ball game anymore because I can't sit in the chair that long, or I can't move my shoulder the way I used to. I can't lift up my grandchild. Whatever it is, this falls into the broad range of things called hedonistic damages. We also use the term loss of consortium. This is an older term, and one that when I was in law school, always brought lots of giggles, so I might as well raise it with you in the hopes that it will get giggles from you as well. Loss of consortium has to do with the inability to have sexual relations anymore. So that apparently there's a dollar amount that can be put on that. So if someone is injured in a way that prevents them from having sex anymore, this would be a loss of consortium, and that would be one of the things that the court or the jury can award somebody money for if in fact they've lost it because of something that some tort that they have suffered. And by the way, there's another term I want to introduce you to, and that's the term tortfeasor. Tort, T-O-R-T, and then the word feasor, F-E-A-S-O-R, is tacked on. It's a compound word, tortfeasor. And a tortfeasor is someone who commits the tort. So the plaintiff sues the tortfeasor in court, at which point the tortfeasor is the defendant, and they're trying to prove in court that someone is a tortfeasor. It's the person who commits a tort. So go home, try that one out on your roommate, try that out on your best friends, and they'll think, boy, you're really pretty smart because you're using fancy words now. Okay, so let's go oddly enough, back for just a second. There was a slide that we skipped over called examples in healthcare, and let's just see a little bit how those might play out with all of these intentional torts that we've been talking about. Certainly for the intentional tort of battery, it's the non-consensual touching of another. What if a surgeon cuts somebody, or better yet, a surgeon has somebody comes into the operating room and they're supposed to have an appendectomy, and they give consent for an appendectomy, and then the surgeon says, gee, while they're at it, why don't I just fix that bunion on their foot? And the person wakes up and says, gee, I didn't want to have the bunion fixed. I liked my foot the way it was before. That doctor has done something. There's been a touching that took place that was not with consent. Just like there's a touching that takes place if I, punch you in the face. If I punch you in the face, that's a non-consensual touching. It's also a non-consensual touching if a surgeon touches you in a way that you hadn't consented to. So that can happen in healthcare. Assault in healthcare, suppose that you've got an unruly patient in the emergency room and you tell them, look, if you don't stop it, I'm going to jab this, hypodermic needle in your rear end and, knock you out in a second with it. That would be assault if the person had a reasonable apprehension that you were going to do that. I think the false imprisonment, we talked kind of briefly about that when we were talking through the torts. This happens sometimes in nursing homes where they have patients that are difficult and maybe they tie them to the bed. It also happens in hospitals sometimes. And there are limited circumstances where you can do that, where it is permissible for limited periods of time. But if it's excessive, if it's not warranted, if it's done and then the risk passes and you've still got this person tied up, you should expect that there's going to be a suit for false imprisonment in the world of healthcare. In the world of healthcare slander, suppose, if you will, that there are two doctors. One has privileges at the hospital. The other wants to have privileges at the hospital. As the physician without privileges applies for privileges at the hospital, the other doctor who already has privileges and doesn't want a competitor starts, malicious rumors. That person really is a drunk. They're addicted to painkillers. They lost their privileges at all the other hospitals in the state. All of which, if those things are not true, would be cause for slander. Suppose we have the same thing and someone simply does it in writing instead of by speaking, then that would be libel. Invasion of privacy, not difficult to think of in a healthcare setting. Suppose, if you will, in a healthcare setting that somebody looks at your chart, your medical record, and they cut out sections of it and send it to other people. Gee, you ought to know this about your neighbor, or you ought to know this about your boyfriend. He really has this problem and this problem and this medical problem that you didn't know about. That's an invasion of privacy that could come up in a healthcare setting. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. I've used this example before. Suppose, if you will, that there's a surgeon. He comes out of the operating room and he goes to the family and he says to the family, gee, I'm sorry. I did everything I could for your dad in there, but it just didn't turn out the way I wanted. He's going to be a vegetable for the rest of his life. And of course, the family breaks into tears and they're crying. And then after about a minute, the doctor says, I'm just kidding. I just always wanted to see what would happen if I said that to somebody. Well, that's a horrible, horrible thing to do. This is someone who should never practice medicine. It is also an example of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Conversion, it could be as simple as removing somebody's ring and putting it in your pocket while they're under anesthesia. It could be stealing somebody's wallet. But think of it also in another way. Think of it, if you will, of suppose that I'm sorry that when we went through the slides, I didn't do conversion. I'm not doing well on these slides. I'm not used to using slides, so I apologize. There was a slide that had a picture of the Hamburglar. Conversion I didn't explain. My apologies. We have to go backwards. Conversion is the taking of someone else's property. It is converting somebody else's property to being your property. That's the tort of conversion. I apologize for having jumped past it in my haste and in the crisis of having the battery on the camera run out. I jumped past conversion. So conversion is an intentional tort. It's converting someone else's property to your own. So in a healthcare setting, it could be, as I described, taking somebody's ring or something like that. It also happens if you send a bill to an insurance company fraudulently for something that you didn't do, you get money from them. You've converted their assets to yours. That's just like stealing from them. So that would also be an example of conversion. Okay, so we've got the examples in healthcare. We understand what the kinds of damages that can flow, both economic and non-economic. We had started to talk about punitive damages. So let's go to the slide that says punitive damages, also called exemplary. And again, hopefully everybody's back on track with the right slide. This is a picture of me driving the car blindfolded while drinking, which, by the way, I'm drinking ginger ale. I don't want anybody to think that I'm doing anything terrible. But driving blindfolded, if you've never done it, is one of the joys of life. It adds a certain excitement to driving. I would suggest to you that it's going to fall into a special category that we'll talk about in a minute. But it could result in punitive damages. Punitive damages can come in torts in two ways. You can be eligible as a plaintiff for punitive damages if the defendant has committed any intentional tort that you can prove. If you prove an intentional tort, you've made it to the bonus round. The bonus round is punitive damages. Punitive damages are designed to punish the wrongdoer, so that people don't continue to hit students over the head with chairs just because they fell asleep, so that people don't continue to steal property from other people, so that people don't continue to do all these terrible things that we've talked about in intentional torts. Punitive damages are on top of those regular economic damages, on top of the other non-economic damages. It's a special class of damages that is designed to punish the wrongdoer, punish the tortfeasor in cases of intentional torts. They're also sometimes called exemplary damages because the idea is to make an example out of somebody so that other people who are thinking of doing that kind of thing or thinking of engaging in that kind of behavior decide, it's just not worth it. If you will, take conversion, for instance. If the only penalty for conversion is that I have to give the money back, I might as well take it all the time, and maybe sometimes I won't get caught. But if the penalty is that I have to give the money back and I might be punished with extra damages, then I'm going to think twice about engaging in conversion. And punitive damages, the Supreme Court has told us, have to have a rational connection to the actual damages. What they meant by that and what they said in that decision, it's a really interesting case that came out of Alabama it's now been 25 years ago probably. It's an interesting case that basically says that the punitive damages shouldn't be more except in the most unusual and rarest of circumstances. The punitive damages should not exceed 10 times the amount of the underlying damages. So if somebody has been damaged to the tune of $100, the punitive damages shouldn't be more than $1,000. If they've been damaged $1 million, the punitives shouldn't be more than $10 million. So that's not a perfect formula, but it gives you an idea of kind of where the courts are going to say something above that is excessive and unfair. Now, we've talked about these punitive damages or exemplary damages, and they make sense, but what about this guy driving in the car here? Is he committing an intentional tort? Is that battery? No. Assault? No. Slander, libel, conversion, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's none of those things. And yet there's something very disturbing about seeing this guy driving down the road blindfolded. And that is that this person is committing something in the next category of tort. The next category of tort is going to be negligence. When we talk about negligence, someone like the person in this picture is committing an extreme form of negligence, which is called gross wanton misconduct. Okay, gross wanton misconduct occurs when you have a callous disregard for the safety of other people. It is not simply that you've strayed outside of the norms of behavior, that you had a duty that you didn't live up to, that, you could have done a better job, you should have done a better job that you didn't. Instead, you're driving down the road blindfolded, drinking while you're driving. This demonstrates a callous disregard for the safety of other people. And people that do that should be punished in addition to simply having to pay for the damages that they've caused. So punitive damages are available if there is